Thank you. Welcome to this meeting of the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee, being held on Tuesday, the 15th of October, 2024. Fire and emergency evacuation for those present in the meeting room. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. Papers and recording. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. For participants in the room, please use the microphones to speak, pressing the button on the right of the unit. Please speak directly towards the microphone, otherwise your contributions may not be picked up on the live stream. Please ensure that mobile phones, laptops and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. Procedure and etiquette for the meeting. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request that they use the raise hand feature within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon? Apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Roger Phillips, and I understand that Councillor Roger Thomas is presented as the named substitute for Councillor Roger Phillips. Thank you very much. Do any members wish to declare any interests in any agenda item? No? Thank you. The minutes of the documents The document of the meetings held on the 10th of July 2024 is included in the agenda on pages 13 to 16. At this stage, no matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. So is everyone content here that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Yep. Thank you very much. No questions have been received from members of the public on this occasion, and no questions have been received from councillors on this occasion, which brings us straight on to item 7, local authority housing delivery models. And the purpose of this agenda item is to receive an update on the commissioned research into housing delivery models in other local authorities. And just for a bit of context, this all came about because of the motion that went to full council on 8th of December 2023. And a request was made that the Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee undertake a review of good practice in housing delivery provided directly by local authorities and make recommendations to Cabinet by June 2024. The review that we've undertaken has been done by Three Dragons, and they will be presenting their interim report today. We also, at the last meeting, we had an internal review, and we asked for more information, and a second report has been presented. And I think Hayley's going to be giving us an update on that, or will be here to answer questions on the report that's been submitted to this committee. Is that correct? Yeah, thank you. Hayley, I think that, unless the committee feel otherwise, I do think that the internal report tends to set the scene for the need for the external report. It's as if that comes before we get into Three Dragons, and I wonder whether it might be useful to start with your report, Harry, or Roger, if Roger wants to talk it through, whoever wants to talk it through, and to take some questions and explore the internal report before we move on to the Three Dragons presentation. Is that okay with everybody? Because it's all as one item in the agenda really today, isn't it?
That's fine by us, Chair. I think just in terms of setting the context, so we had the session 2 or 3 months ago where we kind of ran through some slides as a bit of a kind of a briefing and training session for the panel before we got into some of the detail today around the models going forward. The report that you've got kind of reflects a lot of what was discussed on that day, so provides you with some further context and tries to fill some of the gaps that you raised in that meeting. So it kind of sets out in a way, to a certain extent, what the social housing requirement is and where we have gaps and what some of the affordable challenges are. They are they are interrelated, but there are two distinct things really that we have in terms of the challenge for the county. So one is we've got a social housing issue in terms of Hayley having enough bed spaces to be able to accommodate people of need, and then as a county we do not have enough affordable housing to retain the younger generations that we need to bring forward the workforce that we need for the future, to offer that kind of range of housing option for the county. So those two things are interlinked, because some of the affordable housing supports the social need, but it is broader than that. And the housing model discussions that we'll get into later is about how do we address the total need for the county. I don't know whether Hayley wanted to add anything.
Thanks, Roger. I think you summed it up well. I think if we could go through it and then answer questions as we go along, you'll probably get more from it rather than me just talking to you, if that's okay. We have got data. I can differentiate between the different forms of affordable housing. I think there's often a mix-up between those that are homeless, street homeless and rough sleeping, as opposed to those that are just presenting as homeless. They all fall into the vulnerable category, but they are two very distinct groups. And then on top of that, you've got your general needs. So that's just people who have a housing need, but don't necessarily fall into homeless or rough sleeping. So there are different elements of affordable. So I think it's probably better if we talk through the report, and then that will probably draw out questions.
Have you got a presentation for us, or do you want us to talk it through, or do you want us to leap straight in with questions?
So we've got the presentation that you had last time, and then we've just got the notes. So I think it's down to 3 dragons, and then questions from that, if that's okay.
I think if you've got any questions from the kind of the main report, so you've got 2 documents. One, some introductory slides from 3 dragons that starts talking about the model, and there's the main report. If you've got any questions related to the main report that you'd like to ask in terms of clarification of numbers or approach, perhaps if we took those first, as you were saying, and then...
Is everyone happy with that? Yeah. I mean, I was looking at the predicted housing need, firstly, and I wondered how the 16,500 was calculated.
So that's the 16,500, which is in the current calculations for the core strategy as it is, or local plan reviews we're currently going through. So there's a national calculation effectively that we get allocated as part of the local plan process, which looks at how we look at the future kind of housing need over the next 20 years. So it's that national calculation that's set by government through the National Planning Policy Framework, which helps us work out what the 16,000 total is for all housing. It should just be noted that the National Planning Policy Framework is currently going through a consultation following the national elections earlier this year, and that target potentially will increase to 27,000 new homes over the next 20 years across the county for the next local plan period. So in the next 20 years, we'd have a target of 27,000 rather than 16,000 ish new homes. The National Planning Policy Framework is probably due to report back, we anticipate, in January. The council's response to that is that 27,000 is probably a bit too high for the county to sustain, and there are lots of challenges in terms of the infrastructure that we would need in order to kind of support that. But that figure is likely to increase to become a new mandatory housing target for the county somewhere around the 27,000 new homes mark.
So we're going to be looking at somewhere in the region of 8,000 to 9,000 affordable homes.
As a proportion of that, around, so the current planning policy is around 40% affordable homes. There are variances around that. So when the new national government announced some of their housing target changes, they said anything we're building on greenbelt or new land would have a golden target of 50% affordable housing associated with it. Our current local plan or core strategy policy is 40% for any new development, but that's worked through, as we just discussed, I think last time, through a process of review and negotiation with the developer who present what's affordable in terms of that target and whether it's achievable or not within each development. If it increases to 50% on any new land, because obviously there's not a lot of brownfield land in Herefordshire to build upon, so if it's on new kind of greenfield land or undesignated previous kind of farmland and it's at 50%, there are some challenges around how viable is that commercially to build from a developer perspective, and that's one of the things we'll just need to work through once we've got the clarification from the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework consultation outcomes, probably in the new year.
And just for clarity, the existing percentage split between affordable and social, how does that break down? Could you give that to me?
So we've got the housing market area needs assessment, which is our local needs document. So we have to have a statutory duty to identify need in the county, which backs up the 16,500. Within that document, it looks at trends, it looks at housing need, it looks at data that we provided, and from that it then works out what our threshold is. So Roger said it's 40%. It differs slightly just in different market towns. So it could be 25% in Leominster, 40% in Ross. So it depends on the market town as to how much the percentage is. From that, we in strategic housing, we then look at the needs data. We look at home point. We look at local knowledge. We look at what stock has been developed in that area. And from that, we then work out what the breakdown of accommodation should be. Social rent is our greatest need, so we will always push for more property to be delivered in social rent, followed up by an element of home ownership. So that could be your locals market, your discounted market, or your shared ownership. Developers sometimes push back, not often. If that's the case, what we could do is, rather than change the 10 years and lose them, we flip social rent to affordable rent so that we're still getting a rental element from it. So rented is always our greatest need in the county. Social rent is the greatest need overall. But that's down to the officer to determine from all the needs data what the tenure should look like on site.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on figures at this stage? No? Okay, moving on. Okay, yeah, Councillor Hitchener.
Hayley, thanks. I'm a little bit confused by the figures. Could you perhaps give us a sort of bit of a context? So if we carry on as we are at the moment, there's reference to there being a shortfall in the number, and I can't quite understand what that shortfall is. Okay. So if we carry on as we are, what does the picture look like in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Just so I can get a picture. And what's the sort of cost then to the council? Because you've mentioned here about, is it last year it went over budget by 1.3 million, and I'm looking at figures rather than people. So it's about finance, but also has a real impact on anybody who's not in their own home, who's not in the right sort of accommodation. So we mustn't forget the human side of it. But I'd be interested to know, what is the current shortfall? What's it going to look like in 4 or 5 years' time? What's the kind of cost? And a kind of supplemental question, which I'll ask now, is in 5A, you refer to 1,957 households on the general needs affordable housing waiting list. And you specifically said that doesn't include people who are on the street.
Yep.
So does it include everybody else? And within that category, within that 1,957, are there kind of different categories? So, for instance, I know someone in my ward who is living in a caravan. I think they're on the waiting list because they want to move. So they have got accommodation at the moment, but they just want something. And there are other people who have their children are getting older, so they need to be having bigger houses. So they are currently in accommodation, but they're waiting. Lots of questions there, Hayley.
And I think this is where you're getting slightly mixed up. So we've got we've got those who are home. Start with the beginning. We've got those who are street homeless. So those who are actually on the street, don't have a home to go to. We don't always have a duty to them. But we don't have a power to them, but we have a duty to them. So we don't have to pick them up, but as Herefordshire Council, we have decided that we will accommodate and work with everyone to get them off the street. It's the right and humane thing to do. So we have a number of properties which form our pipeline. So we've got the hub, which is our homeless hub. We take them in, we support them, we work with them, we give them the wraparound services, we work with them to get them tenancy ready to then move through the pipeline of accommodation that we've got if they're street homeless. We've then got those who are classed as homeless, but they could be sofa surfing, so they have a roof over their head, they have somewhere to go, but it's not anywhere permanent. So we also try to work with them, try to get them registered. We have different initiatives there, so we've got rent, deposit, we help them secure their benefits. So we try to get them into a position where they're able, A, to bid on Home Point if they register with Home Point, but B, to also access private rental if that's their option. And then we've got the bulk of the people on Home Point on the waiting list, which is the 1,957. That's just over 2,000 now. I mean, it's increasing daily. Those are the people that have every other housing situation you can think of. So they could be living with mum and dad, but they're ready to move on. It could be that they want to downsize. It could be that they're in accommodation and they're overcrowded. So everybody else sits on that waiting list. So within the core strategy, our 16,500, that's the number of units we thought that was the number that was identified that we thought we needed to provide to help with the housing issue. That is nowhere near enough. Not only are we not meeting that annually, it wouldn't be enough even if we did, because of all other issues outside of that. So we're finding lots of landlords who own private accommodation are given Section 21 notices, so no fault evictions, because legislation has changed and it's not as easy to have properties. So they're selling up. There's lots of landlord properties. So those people present to the council. We have a duty to those people, so that's when they go into temporary accommodation. So sitting aside of the waiting list of just over 2,000, we've got, the numbers are back up at 144, so we've got 144 households. That's not individuals, that's households in one form of temporary accommodation or not. So that could be the B&Bs, the hotels, or we take a lot of properties with private landlords and we lease those properties, because we don't want people and households sitting in hotel accommodation because you don't have the cooking facilities and washing facilities. So we're always trying to come up with alternative to accommodate these people whilst we work with them to try and find more permanent accommodation. But there's a shortage of accommodation, A, because not enough is coming through the pipeline, but B, because RPs now have to upgrade their properties. So lots of RPs are holding their stock back. It's not coming through when it's void because they're having to do remedial works, repair works, the damp and mould, EPC, condition raising. So they're having to do a lot of additional work. Not all RPs have the funds to do that, so they're taking their properties out and leaving them void at the moment until they've got the funds to do that. So the number of properties is just getting smaller and smaller. Households requiring that accommodation is getting bigger and bigger.
Thank you. I'm just going to stop for 1 second. I've just been informed the live stream isn't working. Do we want to take a sort of 2-3 minute break and see if we can get it working, or do we want to plough on? What's the general consensus, committee members?
It's up to you, Chair, I think, probably.
Okay. Well, if there's a belief that it is working. It is working, Chair, yes. Okay, then we'll carry on. Sorry to interrupt. We'll take a question from Councillor Baker, please.
Can I just follow up?
Okay.
So Hayley, you've explained everything, and you said it's an increasing problem, but I haven't heard you say how big it is if we don't do anything, and the cost. Because I say 1.3 million last year. I mean, are we sitting on 2.6 million deficit this year going forwards?
Okay.
But I don't want to rely too much on the figures, but that, from a council perspective, we need to know if there's a bit of a hole appearing there. But it just strikes me, that it's an increasing problem. It's not going to go away. We do have to take some action, which is what we as a committee are looking at. But I know when we were at the administration, we were looking at seeing what we can do, and we were finding little pockets, but little pockets aren't going to help, are they? So you've even mentioned just now, the number registered is another 50, since you last read the report. But if it's another 50 every month, that's 600 more people in a year. It is a train crash waiting to happen. So I just wanted us to have a bit of context, not scaremongering or anything like that, but a bit of context as to what we're looking at. We're not looking at little bits of land. We're looking at trying to get hold of a lot of money in the council to enable us to buy more homes. But you buy homes, but that means the council then owns them. There are fewer. We need to have a substantial building programme of council affordable housing, and I mean I may make the point later, but calling something affordable housing is just a total misnomer. It doesn't actually mean it's affordable, because it could be too expensive for people to actually live there. It just happens to be a convenient definition for statutory. I'm more interested in the
Okay, thank
definition
you,
of
Councillor.
social
Let
rent.
Hayley, let's Hayley come back in. I think you've said a lot there. I want to, we maybe come back again, but I just wanted to try and address some of those points if possible. Thanks.
Okay, so I didn't talk figures. So last year we spent £3.5 million on temporary accommodation. That was to ensure people were taken off the street, had suitable, adequate accommodation. We ended up 1.3 million overspent. The £2 million I can claw back through housing benefits and through government grants, but it still left me with a shortfall of 1.3 million. So we are trying everything we can possibly think of in the team to try and keep that number down. But forecasts at the moment are looking like we're going to be about £1 million overspent again this year. And that is on temporary accommodation. So that is just for one client group. We work with the RPs. We have no powers over the RPs. We work with the RPs. That's how we secure our accommodation. So yes, we need more RPs in here. Yes, we need more development in the county. Yes, that could be us delivering. But there's also work that can be done with the RPs. You know, they need to be making better use of their stock. You know, they should be moving tenants around so that they're utilising that accommodation better. But aside of all of the figures that I've just said, so just over 2,000 on the waiting list, you know, besides the figures that we have got in temporary accommodation, we've also got the vulnerable groups. They don't register with Home Point. So, you know, the accommodation for learning disabilities, mental health, all of those sit aside of this need as well. And I usually secure that accommodation through the housing associations. But we need to move away from the reliance on housing association properties, which is why we're trying to encourage people to go down an affordable home ownership route or try open market rental because of the shortage at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to start. Just the breakdown of that 1,957 as it is on here.
Yeah.
They're just on the affordable housing waiting list, but that doesn't mean everyone's going to be able to buy a home, does it?
This is just the rental.
That's just the rental.
Those that require an affordable home ownership product, we don't have a register for them. Homes England used to, and then they got rid of it because what they've said is that you used to have a local connection to the area to get that home ownership product. They've taken that away now, so they don't need an agency for it. So in the housing market area needs assessment, it has a figure, so the Hum and RR needs data document, it has a figure of what home ownership we think we need, but we couldn't tell you exact numbers.
And when we look at the affordable homes that are being built,
Yep.
are the figures, are those all affordable rentals, or is that affordable purchase as well as rental?
That's a mixture of rental and home ownership.
And how does that break down normally in terms of between purchase and rent and percentage?
We usually go for 60-65% rental. The remainder is a home ownership product. But there are some anomalies. So depending on the size of the site, so anything under 15 units, most housing associations don't want to be involved with it because they've got to do the same amount of work for 15 as they've got to do for 200 houses. So anything 15 or below, we tend to do as a home ownership product, so a locals market or a discounted market.
That's very helpful. I think we've got a question from Councillor Baker. And then what I'm going to suggest is I think we've set the context quite well, unless there's any other immediate questions for Hayley. I think we might then move into the presentation, and then we can come back and maybe questions can be addressed to both of you. Councillor Baker first.
Thank you very much. I had a power cut just now, and so I lost my Wi-Fi, but there we are. With regard to private landlords, I read a report recently in the press that was said that they're going to have to make their accommodation up to standard for installation, and if they don't, then they'll lose their certification, which means that people, especially in the rural areas where it's difficult to insulate older properties, it means that their tenants will have to move out, which means that's another pressure on the council. And of course, with regard to house building, that we got from Natural England, we have these problems with phosphates and having to come up with phosphate credits. And I'm told, well, it was last week, that we don't have any credits available. So it means that we can't actually build any houses at the moment. It's all very difficult. I don't know whether Hayley, you've got any comments on those things.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Yes, you're right on both. So the rules around EPC are changing. So it's the same for the housing associations as well. If they don't upgrade their properties, they can be fined. So what we're finding at the moment is the housing associations are actually holding on to their properties and trying to do the works as and when they get the capital to do them. If they don't have the capital, the properties sit there void. It's cheaper to them to leave them void than it is to be fined. So it's the same for private landlords. The phosphates, that's an issue for me as well, because we get our percentage of affordable housing through the planning gain sites. There have been lots of sites that have been caught up in the phosphates. So 35% of those bigger sites over 10 units have got an affordable element, and it's all sat there waiting to be delivered. We've got over 1,000 units sat there at the north of the county that can't come through until the credits are there.
Okay, thank you.
Makes a bit of a mockery of the numbers we've got to build in the next 20 years.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, Councillor Cornthwaite.
I just wanted to clarify one or two things regarding street homeless. As an ex-street pastor, I've got a great concern over anybody that's homeless. So I'm not coming from an angle that says there shouldn't be any. We've cleared all the streets of Hereford from home and got all the homeless people in. Then Hereford's inundated again and said, we've got homeless people. They've come in from another area. Do those people that are now on the streets of Hereford that have come in from another area go ahead of all the people in our own county and have got something? Or because I can see your heart is to get people off the streets, and beautiful heart, but it just seemed like a circle problem. And if we haven't, I can't believe that all the homeless people that are in Hereford right now, street homeless, are Herefordians or have a connection with our city, but they may well see it as a soft touch, and I wonder how we deal with that.
Thank you. So you are right, not everyone street homeless belongs to Hereford or comes from Hereford. So we do have a number of people who have travelled into Hereford. We actively work with them and we try to send them back to their county that they've come from. So we will actively pay for clothing, food and transport to take them back to that local authority. We don't just put them on the bus and send them. So we work with that local authority as well. So we engage with them and inform them that we're sending people back to them, because that's where the duty lies, not within Hereford. We also have people on the street who have no recourse to public funds. Again, if we didn't work with them, how else would they live or survive? So we're not accommodating them into permanent accommodation. What we're doing is we're working with them and supporting them and providing shelter. And one way that we do that is through the winter shelter. So I open the winter shelter between December and May. So it's 6 months open. It ensures we get everyone off the street, ensures they have clean clothes, they're able to wash, we feed them. But it also enables the support workers to actually go out every night and talk to them, work with them, understand their issues. Can we bring in external agencies, understand why they're street homeless? Some people say that they never want to be accommodated. They're quite happy to be on the street. They're entrenched. No one wants to be on the street. It's because you've got deeper issues. So that 6 months gives us time to work with those individuals to work out that is. And then from that, we can sometimes move them back into family. You know, we build those relationships with their family with them. Some people have got family in Hereford, you know, which we can also repatriate them with. But each individual is very different. Sometimes we have seasonal pickers, so they work throughout the summer. They don't want to go back to their country where they've come from, so they'll just hang around in Hereford for 6 months, and then the fruit season or picking season will start again. So there's lots of different people that are street homeless. Some are truly street homeless, some not so.
Councillor Thomas.
We are losing a lot of houses through EPC. Have you got any figures?
Oh, No, but I can get them from the housing association for you. I know it's an issue because each week on Home Point, the waiting list, the properties being advertised is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So we are talking to the RPs. I don't have figures to hand, but I can get you some.
Thank you, that'd be useful.
Do you know, as a local authority, whether we're putting pressure on the government to delay this?
So there has been a consultation which we have responded to. What they're trying to achieve, I think we all welcome. We all want more sustainable, warmer homes, but there's not necessarily the funding to go alongside of that, and timescales are quite quick. So all of that we have fed back. Doesn't seem to have made any difference.
Okay, I think we've set the scene quite well. That'd be great. I think now we'll ask, Lynn, are you going to give the presentation? That'd be lovely. Do you have access to the screen?
No, I don't. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. No, I don't have access to the screen, and I'm doing a double act, if this is all right,
Okay.
for the committee, with my colleague Laura Easton, who is on the screen there. But I don't have access to the screen, so...
We've got it here. There we go.
Oh, excellent. This is wonderful. We're just going to run very quickly through the report that I think you've had the chance to see and read. So we'll just pick out the highlights, Laura and I. And just to give you one line about Three Dragons, we're housing and planning consultants who work around the country and about how to deliver housing, and very keen on how to deliver affordable housing. So that's our kind of specialism. A lot around viability. So some of the words Hayley was saying about your housing associations finding it increasingly difficult to do development at the moment, we're very, very alert to. You asked us to look at a review of approaches to developing and delivering affordable social housing, and I take that to mean you want to achieve, for all the obvious reasons you've been discussing, more affordable housing, and you want more of the rights, the kind of affordable housing you need, which may be both about tenure and about type and size. So that's what you asked us to look at. We would say this is not a deep dive into any one of the options that are being used around the country, but it gives you an overview of delivery models that are being used elsewhere, and it gives you an overview about which models might be appropriate in this context in your area. And that's what we've been doing, looking at what's been going on, or what is going on elsewhere, and what might be something you might want to take further and look at as a Herefordshire option. So that's essentially what we've been doing. And of course, your current position, as Hayley explained, is increasingly difficult. But I must say, as a local authority, you're not alone in this position. This is what we're being told pretty much around the country. And on the next slide, we're happy to take questions as we go if anyone wanted to pose any questions as we go. On the next slide, all I wanted to pick up from this slide is what you get delivered through planning gain, through section 106, very much matters to you in terms of numbers. It really is a very important element. And I would say that as a local authority, you've been doing very well. We come across some local authorities who really are struggling with this, but it is a very important element. So I think what we are saying is, how do you bolster that by looking at other options in addition, not instead of? And that's really what we're focusing on, the in addition. And at this point, unless there's some questions, and we're giving a very quick overview, happy to take questions, I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to talk about some of the perspectives we picked up from talking to a number of your local housing associations, your officers, and other authorities around the country. So, Laura, over to you.
Hello, can you switch to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. Just really the highlights that I want to pick out from here are, we have spoken to a lot of your registered providers, the RPs, and I think Hayley's already touched on this. They're under a lot of financial pressure as well. As a result, thinking about sort of development and increasing delivery going forward, they're being cautious, they're being selective. too. And I think really strongly everybody is waiting for the budget. And I think after the budget at the end of the month, that there will be more, perhaps RPs will be more able to sort of comment on what they want to do going forward, and they want to know what funding they're going to get from the next affordable homes programme, which will change as the new government housing priorities change. So yes, yeah, really a summary that that RPs want to deliver. They want to house concerned to house people in houses that are affordable and meet people's needs, but they're cautious and selective at the moment. And then the next slide is we'll come back to these in a minute. This is just a sort of as an overview. There are a number, quite a large number really, of alternative delivery models. We've put these first three at the top: the local housing companies, direct delivery and joint ventures, because they tend to offer the opportunity to deliver a greater volume than other initiatives. And also to stress as we talk about them that it's a kind of, somebody used the word jigsaw to me the other day, that it's a sort of often a mix and match approach is what works well, and these different models sort of fold around each other, I suppose, and dip in and out of each other. I'm using lots of kind of jingo phrases there, but I think you know what I mean. It's doesn't need to be put all your eggs in one basket. Local housing companies, I think over 50% of local authorities claim they have a housing company. Some are delivering better than others. Some have run into problems as well. But this is a way of delivering outside sort of local authority finance, I suppose. And it means establishing a separate company, possibly with an RP arm, but as a private developer, working as a private developer really, and not just delivering affordable housing. Although I believe I've spoken to local housing companies where that's what they set out to do, just deliver affordable housing, but it doesn't really, it doesn't stack up financially. And normally you would expect some kind of market housing or maybe private rent to go alongside affordable delivery. And then direct delivery is, somebody's mentioned this already, and I'm sure you all know this already really, is that it's where you are acquiring or developing alongside maybe an RP homes that may either become council homes within your HRA, or you pass over to a registered provider.
I think we
And
just
then
got a
joint
quick
ventures.
question, Laura. Councillor Hitchinger?
Yes.
Yes, Laura, I just wanted to pick up something you mentioned about being 100% affordable doesn't stick up financially. I do, I probably agree with you, but it's really disappointing that is the case. And I just wondered, you know, what exploration is there to try to find government funding in order to close that gap with Homes England or something like that? Because to my mind, that's from a building perspective and finding homes for people, that's possibly the most important element, because as soon as you go into developments which are partly open market, you're just competing with every other builder. We need to be doing something slightly different, slightly special. Just interested in your comment, because you said it doesn't stick up financially, full stop. I just wanted to explore that a little bit more, if you could. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, obviously, if at the end of all this research you think, right, a local housing company is where we want to go, and that's what we want to do, you would obviously do a lot more financial work, and you would look at what might work for you. I was speaking to somebody, I don't know, it was probably a year ago now, but they were saying they set out to deliver just social rented homes, but they just couldn't do it. They had to have some discount market sale and some in the end, some market affordable units as well. So ways of looking at funding, depending where you would like us to go
Sorry,
next,
Steve.
we can flesh this out more in the report. But uh, there's
Sorry, Laura, just
opportunities.
quick question from Stephen.
Yeah.
I was just going to help Laura out there. In terms of the affordability for affordable housing, your problem is you've got that the rents are fixed on affordable housing by local housing allowances, and they are below market rent. And therefore, when you look at the cost of construction and the cost of servicing that debt over a period of time, there's basically an imbalance. If we bring Homes England in at the moment, we had a meeting with those 10 days ago. They have no new funding for the delivery housing until March 2026. And like Laura said, they'll wait and see what happens in the autumn statement, but at the moment there's no new initiatives coming out at all. So the availability of grant from Homes England brings with it conditions on delivery in terms of sizes and tenures and everything else. So it's a delicate balance as to whether you take the grant or whether you build into open market and subsidise with open market sale. But it's about about debt serviceability.
Councillor Toynbee?
It's about debt serviceability. There's a certain cost to build a house, and your rent comes from what they call local housing allowances. So the old council rent basically, and the rent on a 3 or 4 bedroom property doesn't equate to the cost of building that if you finance it over a 20-year term. Basically, it's down to it's simple maths at the end.
Thank you, that's really useful. Sorry, back to you, Laura.
Okay, yeah, I'll carry on. There's it doesn't mean that there's not potential later on for Homes England funding, but as Stephen Holland said, then it's not something that's staring in the face at the moment. But there is there are. I mean, there's also potential maybe to deliver private rent, which although it doesn't help you necessarily with people in greatest need on your waiting list, it can relieve some of the pressure or homes for sale at at the bottom end of the market, which again can relieve pressure.
Sorry, I just got a quick question around this though. If you've built that property though and you own it, it's then an asset. It's then an asset, isn't it?
Yes, it's an asset.
You don't have to necessarily have paid for it in its entirety. It remains on your books as an asset.
It does, and you can always refinance the assets to generate more working capital. But it's the way you fund the initial construction cost of the property at the end of the day. Obviously, if it's a council site, and we're putting the land into the equation, you're 25% better off before you start, because normally you'd have to go and acquire that site. So there are some benefits to building on our own land. But it's about the actual construction costs, which, as we know, throughout COVID, we're going through the roof. You know, steel went up 27% during COVID. It was bricks and cement were the same.
Okay. Sorry, Laura, we keep interrupting you.
That's okay. That's okay. And we're going to come back to these a bit later in the presentation, so you'll probably have some more points to raise. And the other thing to say about the local housing companies is that you can include acquisition as well as new build, I think sometimes companies will start off with perhaps acquisitions from private developers or buying themselves on the open market before they kind of go full scale, dipping their toe into developing themselves. And that's the same really with direct delivery. That can be acquisitions. It doesn't have to be actually going out and digging the ground and building your house, building houses yourself. The other thing to say about direct delivery is, you know, that you'd have to open an HRA if you owned more than 200 units, but there are possibilities to link perhaps with a developer, with an independent RP, or to take over the units so that you don't end up with, it's quite a big thing to open an HRA and bring in the expertise to do that. And joint ventures are really similar to above and can be part of above, but they can just be, it's almost like a distinct group of people getting together with usually the delivery of one site or maybe a small series of sites. Typically the local authority contributing to the partnership through the land that they own, but it may be other ways, but raising finance or something. And it's about the parties collaborating to deliver an amount of affordable housing on usually a specified site, and that all the above can be council-owned land, they can be acquisitions or new build, and there are many models, and we can comment further, I think, in the final report. But we're really interested today in where you think you may want to go forward with this. And we also mentioned that acquisitions could include buying back right to buy properties, which was mentioned earlier on. And then there are other models too, a couple of which are mentioned further down this slide, perhaps about leasing properties, maybe from a private developer or investor, or maybe even from private landlords, perhaps to use as temporary accommodation because it's not a permanent fix, but to help bring down that temporary accommodation, particularly bed and breakfast type bills. Focusing on particularly smaller sites, or working with developers where there may be a site, and I think this is perhaps less of a problem in Hereford, but where developers are finding it hard to get a site going, arranging for the purchase of the affordable homes off plan in advance as a way of helping the site come forward at the required level of affordable housing. We go on to the next slide. And this is just really about the national picture, and it's just taken from some research that UCL did. And I think it highlights really some of the benefits of moving away from just Section 106 full delivery. So as well as meeting housing requirements, housing demand, it also gives you a little bit more control over quality of design, and really the types of units that come forward that will actually meet the need on your register, rather than being sort of beholden to perhaps what the developers bring forward. Also helps with homelessness pressure, either temporary accommodation or just the number of people who are homeless too. And sometimes local authorities are just really doing it out of frustration because the private sector are being too slow. And then the next slide. And this is why authorities choose not to get involved. And this, again, from the UCL research, not surprising, and it's largely to do with lack of funding, lack of land, which is maybe not a problem that Hereford has, and lack of expertise because of the crucial need for the right expertise if you move in a different direction.
Quick question. Lack of land.
Yeah.
Have you been given access to the land that the county currently owns?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't know.
I think would that be useful in your research?
It would be useful to comment on.
I mean, I think we made. Sorry, Roger. I think we did make a request for the property portfolio that was presented, I think, 2 years ago to Cabinet. I think there was. I mean, I understand it possibly needs updating, but I would have thought for this work to be properly done, that would be a useful document for them to see.
Yeah, we could certainly circulate the spreadsheet of current council land holdings. There's been kind of extensive reviews done over the last 2 to 3 years as to which ones might be suitable to come forward for housing development. The long and short of it ultimately is we don't own a great deal that is viable for development for housing, and we are progressing the ones that are, and we might come onto these, but Steve joined us to take forward the sites that are most viable, and we're looking at the moment and bringing forward by Christmas a planning application to bring forward units on the Merton Meadow area of the city centre, long-standing proposal for housing provision, and then through the development of the local plan and the additional housing that we mentioned earlier, the 27,000 new houses. We'll need to look at how we extend specifically the extension of housing around Hereford city centre. That's not just the outskirts of Hereford, sorry. and that's not just council land, that's obviously third party land. And then in the local plan consultation, we identified the model farm area of Ross that the council owns for housing development, but also a much broader area of housing around the eastern side of Ross that we're in the process of looking at developing a master plan for. Beyond that, it's dribs and drabs of smaller sites, like the former school site in Home Lacey, that we're looking at how we can bring to market and effectively sell to do the right kind of housing that we need. So we can circulate that report to you, but I guess it's just a kind of caveat that council-owned land holdings will only be a small part of the answer to the housing need that we've got as a county. It's certainly part of it, but it's a small part of that.
Yeah, we'd appreciate that if that could be noted, please. Thank you. Sorry, Laura.
Thank you. Yep, no, that would be really useful, and then we can comment on what land there is and comment on the comments. If we could also see some of the reviews maybe that's been made along the way, so that we don't, we will, yeah. So that we can comment on what's been said before and what other people have felt about it. Obviously, we won't be visiting all the sites or doing a thorough review, but it will be useful to know. Thank you. I'm going to go on to the next slide now, and I believe I'm going to hand over to Lynn. Oh no, I just wanted to say a little bit of something about using your own. Most of these initiatives either sort of centre around using general fund or housing or your housing revenue fund, and that it's really to highlight that there are a variety of models, and the other alternative is for councils to purchase land third party from elsewhere to bring forward. And now I'm going to hand over to Lynn.
Thank you very much. We go back onto the next slide, back to our 3.5 delivery models, which keep popping up in all the literature and talking to all the authorities as being the ones that are available and give you the most control and direction, and at pace, at reasonable pace, I would add. And what we thought would be useful in this slide to say to you, if you go down this route, this is what would be involved in thinking about setting these options up and what you might want to consider later. We haven't got there yet because we still haven't completed our research, but I think these are the key features that I wanted to highlight for you. For a development company, if you go down that route, and about half the local authorities have done so far, it's about establishing your funding, sorting out your business plan and your governance arrangements. And where they seem to have gone wrong, and in a way this is a personal comment that is picked up from a lot of the literature and a lot of conversations with people, is when those things haven't been set up right at the start. And it does seem to be get it right at the start, and you are less likely to fall into any of the problems. And there have been high-profile failures, let's not pretend otherwise. But the advice we're getting is set it up right at the start. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit obvious, but it does seem to be where they haven't been that it has gone wrong. Very much about your clarity of objectives. Are you just after increasing the amount of social rent? Is that the most important thing? Do you want to do that and provide some accommodation for persons in need of a different type? Are you interested in looking to see whether you get some low-cost home ownership into the mix? Clear objectives, and then I think it's more likely to be successful. Obviously, there's a lot of due diligence in anything you set up on this. But when you talk to authorities and development companies, these seems to be, if I call them the golden rules, they seem to be the golden rules about what makes success. As an authority...
Sorry, a quick question for Councillor Baker. Sorry to interrupt.
My apologies.
Thanks very much. Laura mentioned acquisitions, and I wonder whether or not there's any thought has been given to the compulsory purchase of long-term empty properties with no known owner. And the other thing, really, we don't seem, in this county anyway, we don't seem to have given much thought to the building of flats for homeless people.
Hayley?
Thank you. within strategic housing, we have an empty property officer, and her role is to identify empty properties in the county, work with landlords, with owners to bring those properties back into use. We do have a number of properties that haven't been registered with Land Registry, and we can't track down the owners. It's a very long process to even go through the process of finding the owner, getting the property registered before you can even consider a compulsory purchase order. So we work very closely with tracing agents. So we do have a number of long-term empty properties who we have no idea who the owners are. They're not registered with council tax. So we're working closely with the tracing agents, and they are starting to find relatives who own those properties or who are distant relatives down the line. Often the owner has died, has left no will, and the property has just been left there. And it's a long process for them to even trace the families. You then have to go through the Secretary of State to get those properties registered before you can even think of CPOing. But with the tracing agents working with the families, we're finding that we don't need to go down that route, because to get them actively registered then puts the property in their ownership, and then that's when they want to do something about it. So they either want to bring them back into use or they just want to sell them. But at that point, the property officer knows who they are. We have the contact details, we stay in dialogue, and we continue to engage that owner to bring that property back into use. We also have other means to enable that to happen, so we can write VAT reduction letters and what have you.
Thank you. That helps, I think. Back to Lynn.
I just wondered if one of those, excuse me, if one of those houses was on the route of a planned road, we wouldn't, I don't think we'd have a problem compulsory purchasing it.
I think it's,
Stephen?
if it's on the route of a planned road, we have a different set of reasons to actually do it, because we can compulsory purchase that under our statutory powers for infrastructure. So
Maybe we should pretend we're going to build a road.
Yeah, okay. Back to Lynn. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a cheeky comment. I thought you'd been going to build a road for quite some, but
That's a different scrutiny committee.
I do apologise. Just addressing the point about direct purchase off the market or existing properties or new properties from a developer, that's perfectly possible within the different models we've looked at. Sometimes it seems to be a good idea, but I'm going to say horses for courses, and I apologise for that as well, but it's not just something I would say you would set up your whole strategy on the basis of acquisitions. But I do agree that sometimes acquisitions are a good plan, and if it meant you were bringing empty properties back into use, then that would seem to be a good plan, and there are examples out there. So I think that it's a very reasonable thing to think of in your mix, as long as they add to the kind of stock you want. And I think there are always issues around flats that you might want to consider, because flats aren't particularly economic to build in a location such as this, where the values aren't particularly high. It's a strange one, but it does tend to work like that. The next two options, direct delivery and joint ventures. The direct delivery point, when you're going to be an authority that actually builds and markets and manages, there are examples of authorities that do that, but clearly when you get to the 200 units, you will need to open up a housing revenue account, and you may consider that that's a block. That's for you to have a view on. Also, I think the other thing about direct delivery is that somebody else might be able to do it better and take the risk. And it's a point to think about when you come to give that any further consideration. And it does require bringing in a large range of new skills that you may not have in the authority at this stage. Joint ventures, pretty simple in a way. You set up a joint venture on a one-on-one basis. You'll have one joint venture. The typical model is you put the land in and the developer comes in and does the building, and you've got a registered provider, housing association in there as well. Lots of different varieties to that. The other thing, of course, is you can have a series of joint ventures with your a single partner. So there are different ways of doing this. And I think some authorities feel that starting off by a couple of joint ventures is a way to start this process going, but not necessarily the only way. And the other thing I want to say about direct delivery, actually, which I forgot just now and is worth pointing out, there are models out there that are worth thinking about, I would suggest. I'm sorry, I'm being a bit partial here, where you mix and match. So your direct delivery is about sticking with your smaller sites, the garage forecourt, etc., and building a small, and having built a small number of units, rather than getting direct delivery into a very large scale, which is heavily risky, and somebody else out there might be able to do it for you effectively. So those are some things you might want to think about if you want to pursue these various options. And the other one we looked at, which comes up occasionally, is leasing from a private developer. So you actually take out a lease on a series of new properties, defined period of time, an agreed payment arrangement, and this seems to be a vehicle used quite often to look after homeless people. It's temporary accommodation, but it is certainly one of the things to put into a mix. And again, it doesn't preclude you from doing other things, but it might be something you wanted to add to your mix. Although, of course, what you may say to me is, what's the simplest way to get into any of this to start with?
I think that was something that, Hayley, you mentioned at the last meeting. You said that long-term leases with private landlords, and that there was a feeling that they weren't particularly attractive at the moment, and that maybe the paperwork was too onerous, and that the deal could be sweetened with private landlords to attract a few more on board. Is that something you've explored a little bit more? Do you have any recommendations you could make to us on how we could make the deal sweeter to encourage more private landlords to lease to us?
Doing a little bit more research on that. So we use a number of private landlords. That's how we get the bulk of our temporary accommodation. So it's family-sized accommodation. We literally take the property off of that landlord. They get their rent at the end of the month. We cover 52 weeks a year, whether it's void or not. We also do all of the void works. And what we've been finding lately is that some of the fabric of the building belongs to the landlord, so we would expect them to do the works, whereas we would do the inside of the properties. What we've been finding in the last couple of weeks is that we've actually been doing some external works to the buildings. We have been doing those works and we have recharged the landlord, or we've managed to do the works and we've bought them in cheaper because we have a framework of contractors who we use to do our void works. So we've found that's worked quite well lately. We can only pay local housing allowance rates. So a one bed is £91. No, it's not a lot of money. On the private market, private landlords can get a lot more money. So what we've been seeing is that your 2, 3, 4 beds.
Why can we only pay that?
Well, we can pay more, but it just means that we take the hit for it.
But it's cheaper than hotels.
It is cheaper than hotels, but we still need to have the budget there to be able to pay for it.
So it might be a short-term solution to an expensive hotel bill would be to increase, for a couple of years the amount we're willing to pay to private landlords.
What we have done, and we've literally only done it in the last 2 months, is that we need to move away from the expensive chain hotels. So we've actually taken over the running of 3 bed and breakfasts. So the owners still own their asset, but we use them for temporary accommodation. So we place the households, we have support officers who go out every day and check on the families, and we have agreed a set figure per month to use the whole of that property. So it's coming in a lot cheaper than the chain hotels. So that's something new that we have just tried, because we recognise that we cannot continue to spend this money on those hotels. We can pay private landlords more. The market is very buoyant at the moment, and we're competing with lots of other people in the county. So the MOD, the hospital, the colleges, and they all pay a lot more for the rental than we do. So we would have to increase it a lot.
I've been conscious, certainly in Ross, we've been made aware that there are quite a few private landlords who perhaps aren't keeping their properties in the kind of condition that we would expect them to. And obviously environmental health have their hands full with those properties. It strikes me that there might well be a discussion to be had with those landlords to bring those properties up to scratch in order for us to effectively rent them out either for existing tenants who would go onto our waiting list, or who are living in a bad situation, or for new tenants off our waiting list.
But
You
they're
know,
tenanted already, and environmental health are just dealing with the landlord. So they've got
hopefully,
tenants.
but that often doesn't happen.
The way I'm working with environmental health, because the other thing that we've come up with is that environmental health want to remove some of these properties from rogue landlords, but they have no mechanism for doing the housing management and the works. So I'm also looking at working with Charles Yarnold to see how we can form a housing management, a better housing management function within Housing Solutions, so that we can take those properties, we can upgrade them, bring them up to standards, and then use them.
What
which I think,
mechanism would we have for taking those properties?
I knew you could ask me that. It's environmental health. They've got powers where they can take those properties from the landlord. So it have to go through courts. But we request that we take the properties from the landlord, bring them up to standard, take it off of them for a 6-year period. We pay the landlord a peppercorn rent, and the rest of the rent is used to invest in that property.
That would seem a good solution.
And
It's win-win, that, to me.
Yeah. But we've never had that function before, so it's a new discussion that we've just started with environmental health.
What do you need to move that along quicker?
Well, I've just literally had it signed off, so Hillary's agreed it with the business cases there. We're just now going through the process of creating the job description to hire the additional staff, and then we can take on those properties.
Okay.
So they're not big numbers, though. It might be 1 or 2 units a year.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Back to you, Lynn. So, yeah, sorry, Frank.
I was just going to ask about your relationship with Connexus, only in that, how quick would you expect to fetch a property up to standard? What would you think was a normal working time? And I ask because I'm trying to get somebody into a Connexus property, and yesterday while in hospital and we're trying to get him released from the hospital but into safe accommodation, Connexus told him there was a 4-month waiting list to bring that property up to scratch. And that, I thought, was outrageous. And I thought, surely, if we're wanting to house that, I know we're only talking about one person here, but surely there must be a system where we could get that property up to scratch much quicker by helping Connexus.
So Connexus are our LSVT, so they were the council housing delivery, and then once the registered provider was created, they then moved across and were Herefordshire Housing, then renamed as Connexus. I know they've got a lot of staff shortages over there. They are our biggest provider of social housing in Hereford. They've got 11,000 stock, something like that. So they are always our go-to when we need accommodation. Because they've got so much accommodation, they're having to do a lot more works to that accommodation. So they've got their programme of cyclical works where they're going around all of their masonettes at the moment, and they're insulating them. But to enable that to happen, they've got to move those tenants out. They've got to decant them somewhere else. So they're using their own properties, which then means that there are delays on other properties that become void. 4 months isn't good. I'm already talking to their chief exec about it. She knows it's an issue as well, so they are looking at internally of how can they turn those properties around quicker, because the other thing is that when they do advertise them, people are bidding on them, being accepted on the bids, but then they might have to wait 4 months themselves for that property. The only other way that we could move it along quicker is if the local authority could help, but then we would need the funds to do that, and then we would need the contractors to help them do those works as well.
Thank you. Councillor Baker?
Thank you. Have we considered the option for first-time buyers and for affordable homes as park homes? I mean, they're cheap to build, they're very pleasant to live in by all accounts, but we don't seem to have many, apart from holiday sites, really. But I thought as sort of affordable accommodation, it should be something that we could look at.
Affordable as in rented or home ownership?
Well, whatever, really, both.
So home
possibly. I mean,
it's a good
if
idea.
you want to get on the housing ladder, it's a good start, isn't it?
Yep. I know on the park homes you can't mortgage them, so you have to buy them outright, which is where there's an issue around affordability, because people wanting to get on the property ladder don't have £100,000 cash sat there. They need to be able to mortgage them. So I know that is an issue around the park homes. Whether we do it and provide park homes as an alternative for rented. That's definitely worth looking into.
We need suitable sites, obviously, but it's a cheap way of doing it, I would have thought.
Just being reminded they depreciate in value as well.
But it provides a roof.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
But they're not that cheap to bring in initially. So it's probably on comparison with a brick built.
Sorry, Lynn, back to you. I apologise.
No, not at all.
It's
Please.
all very useful, though. Thank you.
The next slide, let's move us on, because I'm conscious that probably are running up towards the end of time you'd like us to take. What we're leading to now is we've done the preliminary work, we've looked at some of the major options for you. We need to understand better about what land you have, because land seems to be very important in terms of developing what sort it is, not the amount necessarily, in getting involved in some of these other longer term delivery vehicles. But the final part of our work, as well as just finishing off our interviews, but the final part of our work is to develop the case studies a little further. We've got a suggested list of 6. They're mainly in the sort of West Midlands area, but not exclusively, and they offer different examples of particular approaches. I'm most interested in exploring further in your views on talking to Telford about New Place, their development company, because New Place focuses on private rent, good quality, lower price private rent, and therefore taking the pressure off the waiting list, and it's been very successful. And although it doesn't meet your immediate need and your comments about social rent, it might be something worth looking at because it's perhaps easier financially to deliver, maybe worth looking at and dismissing instantly, but that's where they focus. And the other one I would say we really do need to dig a little deeper and talk to you about is your neighbours Shropshire, who do have a development company, which, as you know, has been set up relatively recently, and it might offer sort of insights into how they did it, why they did it, and what you might want to learn from that. But I think there are other examples, and the other one in the sort of general area, which is very successful, is Bristol, which has both got a development company and does direct delivery and does some acquisitions. So it's pretty all-purpose. It's been going a bit, but it's been and in a difficult situation.
Obviously, in order for us to say which potential case studies we might feel it would be appropriate for you to take to the next stage, it would be interesting from your initial research to hear where you think your recommendations might be pointing. Are you pointing towards a joint venture? Are you pointing towards direct delivery? What do you currently feel? Because that will obviously guide the case study.
It's a difficult one to answer because it really isn't in our... I don't think we'll end up recommending what you do this, you do that. That wouldn't be a recommendation. I think where we will end up is saying, because of your situation, your desperate need for affordable housing, whatever your land assets are, when we have a look in more detail, although I understand you have land assets, some local authorities don't really have anything, but whatever your land assets are and your ambition, then I think we probably will end up saying it would be worth you having a look in more detail at 2 or 3 of these options.
Okay.
I don't know, though, Chair, if that actually is where you want to end up.
I think we need a clear understanding. We're trying to find a clear path forward. I mean, from what you, just listening to what's been said here, we've got small pockets of land, and from what you've said there, your recommendation might be direct delivery within those small pockets, which however, we've also got a quite sizable piece of land around Model Farm, which could well be an opportunity for a joint venture. That reading between the lines, is that just maybe Roger might want to comment on that?
So I think I don't think there'll be kind of there's not a silver bullet answer to kind of solving the kind of the county's housing challenges, and I think it probably will vary. The approach will probably vary a little bit depending on kind of site to site and what we're looking to kind of do on it. So if you take the Model Farm area as an example, the council owns a lot of land, but actually the area that we're looking to develop is much, much bigger than that in the local plan, through the local plan process. So we will be in a position to work with other housing developers to see how we develop out the area as a whole to meet our affordable housing needs. It's not just specific to the council site. So in that sense, there's opportunity to look at how we work through others for whatever mechanism that is in order to deliver a big, sizable and long-lasting kind of impact. Where you start to look then more at kind of smaller individual site areas or land holdings that we might have, then that might be instead direct build, or it might be around how we work on specific kind of joint ventures with the developer in that area. So I think part of this process is to understand what are the pitfalls and challenges that other councils that have been ahead of us in looking at development companies and others, what have they found to be the right kind of size of plots, right kind of size of massing of development, how have they addressed some of the same challenges that we've had, and that would then kind of feed through to what's the way forward, probably across 2 or 3 of these mechanisms that would help us address the kind of challenges and need as a council as a whole.
I think regardless of which mechanism we choose, I think one of the concerns that was expressed, I think, at our meeting on Teams last week was the power balance between the council and a developer who, I think the quote was, knows all the tricks of the trade. And you know, what sort of recommendations would you make to the council in order to make sure that it was a balanced relationship, poacher turn gamekeeper kind of thing? That would be very useful.
I think that's absolutely one of the central points, and you need your own poachers or gamekeepers. I can't quite work out the analogy, but you need to have the right sorts of skills so that you're working in a more commercial environment, and you're comfortable that you're calling the shots, whatever you do. And that's where I think some of the successful development companies have worked well, because they've had that right set of skill set, which is not necessarily a kind of a skill set you would have traditionally had in a local authority, and they've just moved away into that skill set.
Well, I think from my point of view, the case studies and the work you do around in those case studies would be exploring how the local authorities ensured that they had that necessary skill set from day one, how they achieved that. I think that would be very useful. Sorry, Roger.
I'm just going to kind of add, so not sparing Steve's blushes, but Steve's background in joining us is as a commercial house builder. So he's been one of the poachers or the goalkeeper or gatekeeper. So we've got one in.
Goalkeeper, did you say?
Gatekeeper. I might need to be a goalkeeper as well. He does play football, so we've got a kind of a fox in the hen house, if you like, already on our side to help us work through some of those challenges. But the council does control a number of things which would influence what the private sector do, and so we do have some things to offer. So the land we designate through the local plan says how many houses get built here, where they get built, and how they can develop and make a profit from them. The infrastructure that we build or make the case for or get the investment from to unlock land is something that we've got a key kind of control over. What we grant planning permission for, what one of the 106 requirements are, how that fits with our bigger kind of strategic view of the county is kind of part of that mix. So there is a poacher kind of gamekeeper kind of approach to working some of these things through, but often when you sit in a room with the developers, they want a meaningful and kind of helpful conversation, because if they get to build houses, they get to make money, and we get the housing that we need for the future of the county. If you take, another example is the phosphate challenges across the north of the county. So developers, construction industry haven't been able to build anything in the north or until the wetlands credits came through. That doesn't help them, and it doesn't help us. So there's clear opportunities to work together. It's not always quite a them and us scenarios to kind of work through. We've just got to find a mutually kind of beneficial outcomes that support both of the things that we want to achieve through that process, and that's part of the answer to this.
Yeah, Councillor Cornthwaite.
So can I ask you, Roger, whether or not the council have been able to make any progress whatsoever with that development on Homer Trading Estate, where there's 128 half-built affordable houses, and I've been raising this for over 12 months now. As a local councillor, I get asked quite frequently what's happening, And unless something's happened in the last couple of weeks and I've been unobservant, nothing's happening, except they might have put some roofs on, maybe to protect them this winter, which didn't happen last winter.
I can answer that one. So that is one of our local registered providers. The Stonewater own the site. It was a modular design site, and Ilka Homes went into administration, which is why the site halted. They couldn't just appoint a new contractor because they had to go through the legalities of it, because one company had gone into administration, they needed to go through the insurances and what have you. They then had to go back out to tender for the work, and trying to find a contractor to take on a modular design is quite difficult. They have now got a new contractor. They have signed the contract, and they've been on site about 2 weeks. So they're back on site, and some of those units are coming forward just before Christmas, and then it'll be phased through till about March.
That's brilliant news. Brilliant.
Just coming back to the delivery models, case studies, try and get back on track. What I'm going to try and do is we're going to take a break in about 10 minutes, a comfort break for 10 minutes, if that's okay. This will be the substantial meat of the meeting. The other item hopefully won't take quite so long. Yes, sorry, Councillor Toynbee.
Well, you know, yeah, I've got a few questions about this, but we're nearly at the end of these slides. So are you saying we're going to have a break before we...
We're aiming for at the end of these slides. Yeah, we're nearly at the end. I'm reckoning we'll be there about 1:30-ish when we finish this. We'll take a short break.
Okay.
Sorry, back to you.
I can end our slides very quickly because the next. No, that's, no. I didn't take it like that. Don't worry. All I was going to say is I think in answer really to your question, Councillor Driscoll, about what would we come forward with at the end, and I'm not going to prejudice it, but I think we will try and say to you, you might want to look at this range of options given your circumstances. But I think there's a longer term set of options, which are any of the main delivery vehicles we looked at, the three main ones. And then what we will try and do is suggest some short term, I was going to say fixes, and we don't mean that, but some short term things you can do that will enhance your affordable housing delivery. Won't make it perfect, but it will actually do something for you in the short term, as well as a longer term view of what you do. And I think in a way that was my next slide. It said that effectively. And then the final slide was just telling you the next steps, which is to get your feedback from today, us to go away and finish off our research, and then I think talk further with, get your feedback, however that gets through to us, and then talk further with your officers, and then we will prepare you a final report, and we'll try and be as helpful as possible about where you might want to go next.
What in your head? What's the deadline for your final report? Do you have when are you due to have delivered that by?
I was told it would be helpful if it came back in about a month. Does that? I mean, I'm looking to my right. I need assistance, but I mean, I will need assistance from my right.
I think current contract says first week in November.
So that would be delivered actually before Cabinet on November the 24th, but also before the next Connected Communities Scrutiny Committee on November the 18th? 13th, yeah. So we could add that to our work programme to have a brief review of the final report, so we could make final considerations for recommendations to Cabinet. But we can talk about that in our work programme. Okay, that's very helpful to know. Thank you for that timeline. Any questions now after that presentation before we... Yes, Councillor Toynbee.
I'm confused now about the break. Are we asking questions now about this presentation, or are we doing it after the break?
Now.
I think we'll spend as much time talking about this as we need to, but I was just aiming to take a break at some point because we'll have been here for an hour and a half, and I'm sure we could all do it in 5 minutes. But yes, but by all means, you ask your questions, Councillor Toynbee.
Okay. I've scribbled down so many questions, but I'll just pick a few of them. There's so much. There's been so much to capture, hasn't there? So I really hope we don't lose anything that we capture it. And it's really good to hear from Hayley that latest thing about developers building out what they've got permission for, and I hope we can use all the leverage that we've got to get them to do that. Yeah, I found this presentation really, really helpful. You know, because on the face of it, this agenda looked a bit like our July agenda, but actually so much work has gone on in between that's been so helpful, and, you know, that's really moving us forward. And it's really practical, it's free of jargon, It's about learning from other places, case studies. So from my point of view, I found it really, really helpful. I'm also really grateful to Hayley and her colleagues. They're just incredibly patient. We keep asking the same things over and over again, and they always reply really patiently. So I'm really grateful to that as well. And also for, as you were saying, how much, our workers on the front line who are working with people in crisis or, in difficulty, how caring they are and how much pressure they're under. So, I'm really, really grateful for that. I know I always say this, but we get a lot of data and evidence and, predictions and needs assessments and all that. So sometimes I just have enough of all that, and I just want to get into, okay, to move from in this case, from the demand, talking about demand to talking about supply. So I'm really glad. I think it'd be really good if we don't go back over, the data and the evidence. Now we're on to supply, great. Let's keep looking at focusing on supply and delivery models and everything. It's probably my age and my politics, when I hear sort of 3.5 million on emergency housing, I'm just thinking, why can't we just build social housing, and then we'd have an asset on the balance sheet, like you said. But I know it's not. I know that it's not that simple, but that's why this is so useful as well. And the skill sets, let's think about what we can do as councillors to ensure that we've got the resources and the skill sets within the council to do that. In the minutes of the July meeting, it said that we are a registered provider. I mean, so what, can you explain what that means? Because we're not doing direct delivery, but we are a registered provider. We don't just work with registered providers as partners. Can you just explain that?
I can. So it was over COVID. We actually decided, because we've been looking at, do we become a housing association venture? We've been looking at this a number of years. So about 4 years ago, I went through the process of registering us with Homes England to become a registered provider within our own right. Not only does it mean that we can do the same as all of our other registered providers, we can apply for grant funding and we can build out if we wanted to. It also assisted us when we were applying for other grants. So when they had grants around RSAP and NSAP and RSI. So all of those you needed to have, you needed to be a partner of Homes England. So we just took it one step forward and became a registered provider with Homes England, just in case we ever got to the point where we needed to build our own, because it's quite a painful process. So we did it back then. We've got our own number with them, so we could progress out now and build and develop if we wanted to.
Good, thank you. That's great. Yeah, I've nearly finished. It's just, to emphasise the point of, let's be bold, let's be ambitious, let's look at the case studies, let's visit other places, and move this forward and keep talking about demand and not make everybody keep talking about supply. And not make everybody repeat lots of stuff to us about demand and needs.
And I think
we know what the needs.
I think the way we'll work today is when we make our recommendations, we'll make the recommendations today that we would ask you to look at in the final report. So I think that's probably going to be the best way forward, as well as potential recommendations or initial recommendations that we might want to be putting forward to Cabinet. Okay. Can I think we'll take a short break and then for 10 minutes, and then we'll review where we're at in 10 minutes' time, if that's okay. So can I ask you to suspend A live stream again, please. Thank you. Well, I think we'll all agree that was a very useful session, so thank you everybody for your time and for answering our questions so helpfully. It was very useful. I'm going to suggest a way forward now within the group. I had a brief chat with Roger then. I think we still need to confirm a little bit of clarity around whether the report will be able to come to scrutiny. I will strongly urge the Cabinet member responsible, Crown Biggs, to ensure that we do get sight of the report at our next meeting before we make final recommendations to Cabinet. It should be ready in time, and hopefully that is the case. And as far as I'm concerned, it was this committee that commissioned the report at the request of full council back in December. There was a motion that asked us to do it, so it was put in into action by myself and my predecessor, Councillor Chowns, when we requested the report was done. So, and we should have had the full report for today, and the only reason we didn't have the full report for today was because we were told there was a delay in getting it signed off in August because people were on holiday. So I'm hopeful we will get the report for our next meeting, and I'm going to build it. We're building it into the work programme. If the rest of the committee is in agreement with me that that's something we should do, so that we can consider it at our November meeting and make final recommendations to Cabinet at that time. I think there were a few things that we need to feed back to Three Dragons around how we'd like to see the report develop, the final report. I think I've written down here a few things. One of the things you mentioned, how do we go on the journey together with RPs? Taking them with us. I think that's something you pointed up to me, that occasionally, if we were looking at maybe working on a joint venture, it is a change to the existing model. So how we would do that is without putting people's noses out of joint, shall we say, is something that would be very useful to know, so that it's something we're all doing together because we all want to achieve the same thing. I was looking at the delivery models, and it struck me that I thought Eastleigh was an interesting model to possibly explore, because the local authority there has actually acquired land to develop a mixed tenure scheme at scale, which looks interesting. Telford, which has been going great guns recently, they've established a development company. Shropshire and Wolverhampton. I thought having a brief chat just then outside of the meeting, it seemed like 4 was probably the maximum number of case studies we can reasonably expect Three Dragons to look at in the timescale available. Are we all happy that those are the 4 case studies that we asked them to move forward? Yeah, looking online. Yeah, okay, that's good. So we'll make a note of that. That's fantastic. I need my glasses. That's what I've got them for. And the other thing that came out is some recommendations for how we ensure that a suitable structure is implemented within the local authority to make sure that the relationship is one that's balanced and fair. I appreciate what Roger said about we do have experience already, but I think the more we can do belt and braces to ensure it's a fair relationship between in the power structure between us and what safeguards that need to be put in place, if any. And I'll be interested to hear from the case studies how each of them in turn has ensured that relationship is fair. I'd like my fellow councillors to make any comments as they see fit in terms of how the final report takes shape, if there are any. Now's a good time. Okay, when we'll reserve our position until we get the final report in at this stage. We will continue to discuss, and if we've got any more feedback, we'll take probably towards the end of this meeting, we'll probably have a quiet closed session where we can just talk, and if we've got any more feedback for you based on that for Three Dragons, we will come back to you on that. But thank you all for both reports, very, very useful, and for being so helpful in all of your answers. If there's anything you want to add, now is a really good time. Any of you, before we move on to the next item of business? We're very happy.
Just going to thank you for a helpful discussion, which obviously fed into the study. We'll obviously take away the request around bringing that back to the next meeting. Just confirm that with the portfolio holder and cabinet and timings. It's obviously a hugely critical area that we're all interested in getting right. So this study is a key way of helping us look at what we do next. So thanks for Scrutiny's time and input, and we'll see you at the next session.
Councillor Hitchener.
Yes. Scrutiny is partly about not just scrutinising the officers, but also the politicians and the political decisions that are made. Now, this is slightly different in that we're kind of commissioning ourselves to analyse what might be best. But I just wonder whether Councillor Price had any particular words of wisdom and where he thinks things are going within his administration. I'm not sure, Philip, whether this is really definitely your portfolio or what, but you've spent the afternoon with us, and I feel we should give you the opportunity to say a few words if you could. Is that all right, Philip?
Councillor Price.
Having enjoyed an hour and a half of being able to catch up with my emails, and I absolutely took notice of what you said. I found your previous debate absolutely fascinating, and it drew out a lot of stuff that would be beneficial for not just the wider public to know, but certainly all councillors to know, because it would actually address a lot of questions. But I wasn't listening to you, Councillor, when you just asked me what did you want me to talk about.
Well, it's just that you've had the opportunity to spend an hour and a half dealing with your emails, or maybe listening. That I just wonder whether you had a sort of view. You've sat here for the last hour and a half, Philip. Just wonder whether you had any thoughts on the direction we're going in, how it might fit with your administration, whether you have particular views that might help us.
Okay,
make sure we're doing the right
we've
things.
moved on to the next subject, so I'm fine. I think my colleagues and I would just iterate how big a problem this is. You know, it whatever we do is not going to catch up with the rate of which the problem becomes larger, and unless you actually know why it's getting bigger, it's immediately you're able to say, well, it was mentioned once earlier about they're not Herefordshire people that we're trying to house, etc., etc. I suspect that the one thing that you have not mentioned is there any way to encourage multi-generational use of properties instead of all of the next offsprings getting turfed out and looking for homes and going forward, as to whether or not there's an incentive for next generations to stay on in the original homes, because it does seem to me as if we have a lot of need for homes that are because of breakup of relationships, and then people tend to go back home and start again. But you know, I just wondered if there is any room for some sort of move in that, because one of the challenges we have is that as you have families and they disappear and go elsewhere, lots of people live in homes that have spare capacity. If there was an incentive to utilise that, it's just a thought. But my biggest worry is if you decided to have any sort of development criteria, you still have to go through the planning system to be able to get anything done. And I have a parish meeting tonight, and I've been taking points from what you've been saying as to what I would report to them. They have a housing development in the middle of Peterchurch, 89 houses plus affordable, or including the affordable homes. It's been there for 10 years. It's been planned. It's just not moving forward. It is starting to move forward now, but you know, as I said to Councillor Thomas, you've got all the facilities in Peterchurch. You've got the housing growth coming, but you haven't got any jobs. Not enough jobs, the number of people is coming. So wherever you're going to put these housing, there's got to be some thought about what they're going to do and where they're going to do it.
I think that's true of lots of places. Thank you, Councillor Price. Yeah, Councillor Roger, sorry.
I was just going to say, just to note, sorry, should probably have made this clear at the start. So Councillor Price is here for the next item on the public realm model. Councillor Graham Councillor Graham Biggs is the portfolio holder for housing, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because he's been unwell. And I'm sure he will be at future ones. But Councillor Price wasn't here for the first item.
Oh, Councillor Price, you got away with that so easily. But
Okay, sorry, Laura, did you want to say anything before you leave us? Thank you again for joining us today.
All it was, excuse me, was if when you're discussing it, if you've got any thoughts about the format of the final report, we'd welcome them. You don't have to answer that question now, but I didn't know if you had any preferences. That was all, so that we can produce something that's easy to read but covers all the points that that you want covered.
Thank you, we'll bear that in mind. That's very helpful. Thank you, folks. Thank you for your time today. Much appreciated. Right, we'll move swiftly on to the Public Realm Future Operating Model Task and Finish Group recommendations. Right, I think everybody's here that needs to be here. I think, Alex, you've been very patient in the background. I think, Philip, obviously you're here. Councillor Durkin, you're here as well. Thank you. Hopefully you've all seen the covering report that we issued. I think we had a very useful working group meeting last week. Was it last week? It was. It wasn't the week before. And I think we were all very impressed by the work that's been done, and the recommendations that have come out from that working group is that as a committee we note the report and we fully endorse the findings of the working group's report. I think those are our recommendations. Is that correct? I think. I mean, the working group, yeah. Can I have a proposer for that we accept the working group's recommendations, please?
I'm happy to propose.
Councillor Hitchener. A seconder? Councillor Cornthwaite. All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? No? Okay, no abstentions? Fantastic. There you go. Then I think the recommendations of that report have been passed. So we will basically we fully recommend that the 10 recommendations, it were, that changes to the future operating model contract be adopted. Right. Moving on to the work programme, I think, isn't it? Unless Councillor Price wants to say anything. I said it was going to be light duties today, Councillor Price.
I absolutely agree with your recommendation.
I thought you might.
Could I just
yes, Councillor
Hitchener, if
Hitchener.
I may. Those of us who went to the parish summit, which I thought was a very good, worthwhile event, there was a lot of comments about the right of way, the Prow moving from Barford BT to the council. So it's probably been about 2 years, I think, since that move took place. And it did strike me, Philip, that some concerns that the time we take to move the people into the council, I mean, if we can't do a better job about it in the future, and it's not a political point because the movement took place by the prior people before, during our administration, and it just hasn't got much better. But just that we don't seem to be very good at moving things within from one area to the other. And I think when we had our discussion at the working group, we did say there was a little bit of a concern, and there might be some suggestions that we should be moving the locality stewards across more quickly, and that might be of benefit. Just a general point, Philip, for you, really.
I will give you my opinion, but I know Councillor Durkin has put his hand up to reply, but your point is well made. It is not acceptable to move anybody from one part to another without having a plan to make it better. And you have our first-class officer, Ed, next door here, and the officer brigade has had a major reshuffle over the last few weeks, and with an absolute intention to make sure that we get to the point with the new contractor that the delivery of the service, it is absolutely on top of the position of a new lot coming in. I take your point. Barry, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Philip. Councillor Hitchin, a very interesting side to this matter. But rest assured, the matter is aware. We are aware of it, obviously, because it's good practice to have officers in place at the appropriate time. So this matter is currently receiving attention with the officer class, as Philip calls, and rest assured, there will be a decision made very shortly as to what the way going forward is. But what we must recognise, of course, is that with this contract that is existing with Balfour Beatty Living Places, there are restrictions about how we transfer or make a major change to a contract. So this also is hampering our considerations with regard to how we do it. But rest assured, there will be an orderly transition, if I may put it that way, between Balfour Beatty and the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Durkin. That's very helpful. I think we've covered that. We're moving on to the next item, which is the work programme. I'm going to ask Daniel to introduce the work programme, if that's all right, because I think we're going to need to make some slight changes to it, aren't we?
Thank you very much, Chair. The report that you have in front of you is the work programme for the month of October. As you know, I've moved now to publishing a monthly work programme for all of Scrutiny to allow close collaboration across committees. So the report that I publish is usually out of date within a couple of days. Since this has been published, obviously there are a few changes, and you don't have to make decisions on these now. First of all, obviously you've asked to bring the housing delivery models back to your meeting in November with the final report, so I will make sure that's added to your work programme in November, and that Councillor Biggs has an invitation to attend for that meeting, or rather more accurately, Henry will do that. We've added some dates for your work programmes for May, July and September, and at the moment you don't have anything within your work programme to fill those meetings. I've also had a couple of suggestions from members of the public of topics that you might wish to consider as part of your work programme. I'm not going to go through these now, but I would recommend that perhaps the committee has an informal meeting sooner rather than later, both to discuss how it might use the time that's been granted to it in these committee meetings, and how it might or might not incorporate these suggestions for your future work programme. So if you're minded to do that, then Henry and I will do the necessary.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I think I'm going to suggest we have a work programme teams meeting possibly first week of November. I think there is a possibility that we might not have everything we need for our January meeting at this stage. I think that's a possibility. So I think if I could ask for the committee's patience and maybe have a Teams meeting first week of November, if the officers could find a convenient time for all our diaries, and if in the meantime we could consider possible topics that you might want to have included in the work programme, mainly for later next year, then that would be great. So we will review the work programme at the present stage. We're going to be, we're fine for the next committee meeting. That's all in hand. We will have a busy meeting in November, no doubt. But we do need to think sooner rather than later about what we're going to be doing in full for the January meeting, because obviously any work that needs to be organised will need to be commissioned sooner rather than later, because before we know it, Christmas will be here and things won't be happening perhaps as quickly as we'd like them to. Yeah, Councillor Hitchener.
I just wonder whether we need a separate meeting or whether it could be part of the 13th of November meeting.
I think we might be. I did consider that, but I think it might be. I'd like us to have an informal discussion, I think, around the work programme on Teams. I think that would be useful for all of us to bash through some possibilities and look at some options that have been suggested. and consider them as we move forward. I think that would be a benefit. So, if I could beg your patience on that, that would be most convenient. Thank you. Do we need to propose and vote on this, or do we have a meeting, or I'm not sure. Says I do in the.
Yeah, I think it's it doesn't quite align these days because normally it's the work. So I think what you can do is you can agree the work program that's in front of you, pending any amends that you might choose to make over the course of the next month. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we'll agree the work program as it stands, but then any amendments, what Daniel just said, we'll make at the work program meeting 1st of November. I'm happy to propose that. Do I have a seconder? Frank, thank you. All those in favour? Yep, lovely. Thank you. Okay, so that's carried. I think that covers most of the agenda, does it not? The next meeting we have scheduled is for Wednesday the 13th of November at 10 a.m. So it's a morning meeting. Please make note of that. We don't need an adjournment, so I think that meeting is ended. If we could cancel the live stream, please. Thank you very much.